a short video about the Berrigans and McAlister themselves, and then present the award. And finally, I know Jeff has prepared some remarks which he'll offer, and we'll have some time for questions and conversation with Jeff, Susan, and Teresia. I would like to thank especially Marlon Aguilar and Elliot Ellis with their help with the online portion. They're both working in the back there right now. And Brenda Washington, the assistant in Catholic Studies, who did so much work to make this evening a reality. Our world, as we all know too well, continues to be riven by violence in its many and various forms: military, economic, sexual, environmental, the list goes on. Our committee believes that the example of Jesus Christ, who himself suffered the most horrendous violence, but urged his followers to turn the other cheek, stands as a beacon and a challenge to all of us to put away our swords and to live in the kingdom of God. Thank you. And we'll start, as I said, with Jamie and a discussion of the holdings here at DePaul.
Start by acknowledging our current moment and that we have students engaged in civil disobedience on the quad as we meet right now to present an award that's celebrating social justice activism. And I want to say that we in Special Collections and Archives are honored to care for such archival collections, such as the Berrigan family's papers, that challenge our students to think critically and that nourish our students' commitments to social justice. DePaul Special Collections and Archives collects, preserves, and provides access to rich primary source materials in support of engaged teaching, active learning, and scholarly and community research. Our collections document the history of our university, community organizations and individuals who work for social justice, and the life and legacy of St. Vincent de Paul. In the 1990s, Robert Ludwig, then director of university ministry, invited Father Daniel Berrigan to teach courses and lecture at DePaul University as a visiting professor. He coordinated spring break service experiences at Jonah House in Baltimore so that students could learn from a community dedicated to nonviolence. And he initiated the discussion to preserve the Berrigan archives at DePaul. Bob wrote, "Having the collection at DePaul will allow students who may be considering futures in the peace movement realize that their goals are very attainable. The collections give students the basic research materials for understanding how people have gotten into this kind of work and stayed there." The three unique but interrelated archives collections, the Philip Berrigan and Elizabeth McAlister papers, the Jerome C. Berrigan papers, and the Daniel Berrigan papers, preserve the stories and voices of the family as well as their strong network of friends, colleagues, and supporters. The breadth and depth of these materials strengthen the resources we make accessible for those who are interested in researching peace activism and sharing the stories of the Berrigans through books, films, scholarship, and art. To date, there are approximately 90 linear feet, or 30 standard bookshelves, in these three collections, just in those three, and an additional 60 feet or 20 bookshelves in the smaller collections documenting Plowshare's actions and peace activism inspired by the Berrigans. People send us materials all the time and say, "We knew the Berrigans, I did this with the Berrigans, I want you to have my materials too." So we've had to start these little satellite collections to keep collecting. During class sessions and individual study in our reading room, students read letters written by Phil, Dan, and Liz to friends and family while they were serving time in prison for their peace actions against nuclear weapons. Through these documents in the archives, which are deeply personal, students encounter the humanity and the emotions behind history. This is precisely the goal Bob Ludwig envisioned. Through these connections with the past, coupled with opportunities to spend time with the present-day recipients of the Berrigan-McAlister Award, DePaul students developed ideas about how to challenge harmful practices and integrate peace and justice activism into their communities.
Thank you, Jamie, and on behalf of the rest of the university, thank you for all the work in the special collections part of things. The capacity to be patient enough to let important things happen over the long haul is it's a special gift to all of us. Thank you for that. And thank you and welcome to all of you. My name is Michael Buddy. Scott already lied about me a little bit. Very kind of him. One thing that we have found in the past is that not everyone is familiar with the life and work of Dan and Phil Berrigan and Liz McAlister. We were fortunate a few years ago to be one of the sites to preview a new documentary about their life and times before it was formally released. It's a movie entitled The Berrigans, Devout and Dangerous. It's really a remarkable piece that had access to a lot of previously unavailable archival materials, interviews, and so on. I'm not going to show you the whole thing, but the trailer is 2 minutes and 39 seconds that I think you find worth your while to get it. For those of you for whom these are new people rather than old friends or persons with whom you've been engaged in dialogue one way or the other, this is a way to maybe get a taste of what they and their work has been about. So if the equipment will cooperate, this is the trailer that they put together.
You have the FBI saying that they were terrorists. It was the largest manhunt in history.
J. Edgar Hoover went personally insane trying to track him down.
We pose the question, who has committed the crimes of violence?
Thousands of demonstrators opposed to the Vietnam War assembled in the nation's capital for a mass protest.
I went down there in my clerical outfit, and the whole thing stopped when they saw a priest. I had to join them, and that was my first arrest.
Daniel Berrigan and his brother Philip are now facing up to 30 years in jail for their latest protest.
Why did you do it? Did you do it again?
We are trying to say something about the truth of our times.
We've opened up these grievous questions a little further as to whether or not Americans are allowed to kill the innocent.
They took hundreds of files that were being used to draft people into the war in Vietnam, pour their own blood on these draft files, and burn them with homemade napalm.
Once a person's file was destroyed, they couldn't be drafted.
I had to adjust to the possibility of spending the rest of my life in jail.
What are you doing out on Block Island?
Well, I was writing and reading and meditating.
What are your future plans?
Resistance.
Oh, we can be heroes just for one day.
We didn't bow our heads and remain silent.
It seems scandalous that a priest would be doing that, a priest would be protesting.
Why has the Cardinal said nothing about the atrocious obliteration bombing that Nixon has undertaken in our name?
That's the #1 business of the world. We can't burn the planet down.
It was hard saying goodbye to our parents as they marched off into the fire.
Our oldest just graduated from college, and he's missing those significant moments in their lives. And that's not easy.
That's how they viewed life. Sometimes you're watching the kids, sometimes you're throwing blood on the Pentagon, sometimes you're in prison.
I spent most of the time that I knew them wishing that I had that courage. Killing people is not a good way of solving human difficulty.
That statement is important enough to make if it means that you have to go back behind bars for 5 years, 6 years, 7 years.
No problem.
Through their distributor. So that's a little bit of introduction for what brings us here this evening, and it's my pleasure to introduce Jeff Dietrich and the Los Angeles Catholic Worker, the 2024 honorees that gather us here tonight. When Dorothy Day and her compatriots were, in her words, just sitting around on that day in 1932, a day that marked the beginning of the Catholic worker movement, she likely didn't envision a great chain of witnesses that ran from her to Daniel and Philip Berrigan and Elizabeth McAlister, to Jeff Dietrich, his wife Catherine Morris, and their friends that became the Los Angeles Catholic Worker more than 50 years ago. Dorothy was, by her own admission, worried about the pressures of the moment, feeding and sheltering the poor who started to show up, educating others and themselves about the radical nature of the Christian gospel, and standing up for those with no one else to defend them. But the links are there, from the past to the present and on into the future. It is fitting that members of the Berrigan family suggested, as a way of honoring the gospel nonviolence legacy of the Catholic worker movement, that we celebrate the Los Angeles Catholic worker community as a shining example of those links maintained, polished, stressed but never broken over the course of 5 decades with no sign of stopping. The members of DePaul's Berrigan-McAlister Award Committee unanimously embraced the nomination, and that's what brings us all here tonight. There's an old adage that says it's often easiest to find something worth saying if you've also found something worth doing. Jeff Dietrich tells stories like nobody else because he has had a life like nobody else. But by most accounts, he's a modest sort who would rather talk about the work of peacemaking and the Sermon on the Mount than talking about himself. That leaves it to me to tell you a bit about him and some moments in a life of living out a gospel of dramatic risk-taking and mundane service, all for the long haul, as Dan Berrigan liked to say. Jeff came to the Catholic worker movement around 1970, having been a draft resistor and opponent of the Vietnam War. Lots of people come to the Catholic worker movement, and most move on. Jeff stayed. And he stayed busy, organizing a strike of poor people against Skid Row blood banks that exploited them, and starting a soup kitchen, the famous hippie kitchen that currently serves about 1,500 people each week. When city business and political leaders sought to drive the poor out of town, they usually used the Los Angeles Police Department to do so. One of the favorite moves of the police years ago was to destroy the few bits of personal property owned by homeless people when the latter kept their belongings in a shopping cart. Shopping carts must be stolen property taken illegally from grocery stores, according to the police, which they interpreted as a license to destroy everything in them. Jeff and friends managed to get a court injunction against the practice and to make sure the police couldn't continue to claim that shopping carts were stolen. They managed to do this by deciding to buy shopping carts for poor people. They started off with 100 carts. A while back, they passed the 100,000 mark. Who thinks to buy 100,000 shopping carts? Like many people for whom Christianity involves standing up against the agencies of death and exploitation, Jeff and his colleagues know the inside of a jail cell. By his own account, he seems to have stopped counting once he hit his 40th arrest. Some of those have been in opposition to nuclear weapons testing, against U.S. wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and against the ongoing humiliation of the poor in Los Angeles. My favorite of the Jeff gets arrested stories, at least unless he comes up with something new tonight, maybe around the corner, is protesting against the Catholic Archdiocese of Los Angeles. While it isn't unusual for members of the Catholic worker movement to have occasional disagreements with church officials, it isn't every day that a Catholic worker community publicly rebukes a cardinal of the church for plans to spend $200 million on a new cathedral. It's even more unusual when members of a Catholic worker community, that would have been Jeff and friends, are arrested for protesting during the groundbreaking ceremony for that cathedral. It's even more unusual that protest would involve commandeering a large earth mover, one of those giant pieces of construction equipment, in the middle of the ceremony. Along the way, Jeff and his compatriots started and sustained one of the best publications on the gospel and faithful resistance, with the appropriate name of the Catholic Agitator. He is also the author of 3 books, with his fourth, a memoir, forthcoming later this year. He has been called, quote, one of the best spiritual writers in the nation, besides being one of our most faithful Christian witnesses, according to one reviewer. Then again, he has made his share of enemies, one of which describes the Los Angeles Catholic worker as a, quote, nominally Christian, far-left activist organization and charity, end quote. A, quote, Catholic organization that claims to follow Christian teachings, quote. Against the warriors and the profiteers, victims of racism and a predatory economic regime, inspiring the faithful and challenging the conflicted. As you can see, the Los Angeles Catholic worker community and the tradition they represent so well is a fitting recipient of an honor that celebrates the vision and perseverance of the Berrigans and McAlisters. Please join me in welcoming the by now embarrassed Jeff Dietrich. It's okay, I can bring this to you.
Thank you. Do I need the mic? Yeah, bring it up.
Bring it up.
That's chocolate.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Michael, for that stirring introduction. I have no further I have no further remarks to say, except we are humbled by this award, and like in view of the past recipients, we are just humbled. My life began with resistance. The day I refused induction into the U.S. military, refused to murder, bayonet, maim, or kill the enemies of my country, was the day that I received my life. With that decision, my refusal to kill, I died to my former self and was reborn into the fullness of life. I had run out of options. The U.S. government was trying to take my life, draft me, send me to Vietnam. My student deferment had run out because I graduated. I tried to be a conscientious objector, but I was denied because I was Catholic. I tried to be a teacher, but the education courses were inane. I was sitting in a dental chair thinking that I would get braces on my teeth that would finally keep me out of the Army when I made the decision that would ultimately define my entire life. I decided to resist the draft and refuse induction. I got my induction notice in March of 1970. I was 24 years old at the time. I completed my physical, turned in my papers to the top sergeant at the desk, and he said, much to my surprise, "Dietrich, are you going to refuse induction?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Go over there and wait on the bench." After numerous young men joined me on the bench, another sergeant took us into a room and read us the oath of the Army and told us to step across the line to affirm our assent to the oath. No one stepped across the line. After all, the draft board was in San Francisco, a haven for peace-loving hippies and draft resistors. He read the oath a second time, and no one stepped across the line. From that moment on, I was a felon, a fugitive from justice. My aspirations of getting a well-paying job and living the American dream had come to an end. As a felon, I could not enter professional life. I could not be a lawyer or a teacher or a doctor. I could not even be a barber with a felony on my record. My life had come to an end. My plans of living a comfortable, affluent American dream, as my suburban parents had, collapsed. So I stuck out my thumb and hitchhiked across the continent from California to New York with a Jack Kerouac on the road kind of romanticism in search of an alternative dream. In retrospect, it was a kind of quest to find a vision for my life. While staying with friends in New York, I visited a bookstore where I encountered a book by Robert DeRope called Beyond the Drug Experience. I was beyond the drug experience, which in retrospect saved my life. It explained several methods of meditation, and because I had been reading Franny and Zoe by J.D. Salinger at the time, I chose the Jesus prayer quoted in the book as my mantra. Jesus Christ, Son of David, have mercy on me, a sinner. You have lots of time while waiting on the road for rides. And because I had also been reading Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha, as all good hippies did in 1970, a meditation on Buddhist ideals, I thought it would be better to recite the Jesus prayer than reciting the snap, crackle, pop, Rice Krispie jingle in my head. So I recited the Jesus prayer mantra while waiting on the side of the road for rides. When I was lonely, frightened, or in awkward situations. What I did not know at the time was this mantra was a secret, muffled cry to heaven for my very life. I set out on my low-budget quest to find an alternative dream by trying to buy the cheapest ticket possible to anywhere in Europe. At the time, Icelandic Airlines was the cheapest, but they were not flying into Brussels as they usually did. So I bought a ticket to Iceland, thinking I would find a job on a fishing boat. After all, it was a romantic trip. After spending a week of hospitality in a commune of young students in Iceland, I finally sailed to Denmark. When I arrived in Denmark, I was so desolate, lonely, and cold, missing family and friends. I slept in abandoned trucks and railway cars when it rained, in open fields behind shrubs and under park benches when the weather turned nice. I woke up one morning in Spain to find myself in a city dump, and another morning with a donkey licking my face. I took the train to Marrakesh and smuggled hashish in an ornate Moroccan table. But I was still praying as I walked the dark, lonely back roads in Portugal with a flashlight in my hand. Visiting the spectacular Alhambra in Spain and spending a freezing cold summer days in London parks and public libraries because I had sent my winter jacket back home. I was still praying 6 months later when I landed back in the US, where I fully expected to be arrested for draft refusal when I stepped off the plane from Europe. Much to my surprise, relief, and luck, I was not arrested. I spent the night in Kennedy International Airport. While there, I read my first English language newspaper in months. I read about multiple murders, killings, beatings, and the death of a solitary hitchhiker. Jesus Christ, have mercy on me. Though I was frightened by the brutality of my native land, I stuck out my thumb with more bluff and bravado than sensibleness. I had $5 in my pocket, not wanting to wire home for money. I was still praying 2 days later. When I was on an off-ramp outside of St. Louis, Missouri. I still had the same $5 in my pocket when a Volkswagen van picked me up. We're going to a peacemakers conference, they said. You want to go? I thought to myself, well, I have refused induction into the U.S. military, and I have refused to kill, so I guess I'm a peacemaker. It could have been a rainbow hippie dope-smoking gathering, but instead it was a gathering of legitimate peacemakers who had served prison time for refusing induction into World War II, who had been beaten on freedom rides to the South and protested every war and weapon system their country could devise. They lived simply, refused to pay federal taxes for war, and they challenged my youthful disdain for seniors. I was, after all, from the generation who thought that you could not trust anyone over 30, though some of the peacemakers were well over 50. I was misguided in my thinking because I had never been introduced to folks who had lived their entire lives in an ethical, righteous manner. Unbeknownst to me, I was about to meet yet another group of young Catholic workers who were about to change my life. Though I grew up Catholic, was an altar boy, attended Catholic schools most of my life, I had never heard of Dorothy Day and her radical band of subversive Catholic workers who fed the hungry, clothed the naked, sheltered the homeless, and agitated for peace against the current war in Vietnam. Then the young people from the Milwaukee Catholic workers showed up. They were coming from the trial of the Milwaukee 14. Their founder, Mike Cullen, led 13 others in burning draft files. When I heard what they had done, a light went off in my very soul. I thought that is what Jesus would be doing if he were alive today. Feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, sheltering the homeless, and burning draft files. All at once, my political anti-war convictions came into alignment with my somewhat dormant spiritual Catholic convictions. It was an answer to prayer. I was still silently praying when I got back to my home in Los Angeles, and I still had the same $5 in my pocket. At the time, I had been contemplating continuing my epic journey, this time to Mexico and Central America. But I was still praying when I visited my brother in county jail. Upon completion of the visit, I walked outside the jail and encountered a blue and white laundry van with House of Hospitality painted in small letters on the side. If I had not refused induction, hitchhiked across the continent, traveled to Europe and Morocco, hitchhiked back across the continent, encountered the Catholic worker outside of St. Louis, Missouri, I would have walked right past the van thinking they were selling coffee and donuts to passersby. Instead, I knew that House of Hospitality was the Catholic worker. I talked to the man handing out coffee and donuts to releasees from county jail. I learned that his name was Jerry Fallon, a former priest associated with the newly founded Los Angeles Catholic worker. I was still praying when I hitchhiked to the location Jerry had given me, dressed in my rumpled cowboy hat and cowboy boots, with my hand-tooled Moroccan purse on my shoulder, and met Dan and Chris Delaney, the founders of the newly formed Los Angeles Catholic Worker. Dan asked, "What have you been doing?" I responded, taking a drag off my freshly rolled Moroccan tobacco cigarette. "I've been on the road, man." I did not want to admit that I was something as mundane as a newly minted graduate of the Cal State Fullerton English department. No, I mean before that. After some stammering, I was forced to admit that I was just a boring English major. Whereupon I was promptly promoted to the editor of the yet-to-be-published Catholic Agitator newspaper. It was an answer to prayer. I was still praying as Dan and Chris Delaney left in a somewhat acrimonious dispute soon after I came. Subsequently, a group of long-haired hippie anarchist types joined me to form a community of Catholic workers in Los Angeles. Not a very prestigious group of folks, but fortunately, I had the good sense to marry Catherine Morris, a former Catholic nun, 12 years my senior, who was able to generate community. It was an answer to prayer. For over 50 years, we have created a community of hospitality and resistance on Skid Row in Los Angeles that has stood faithfully for the gospel principles of justice and peace. We have thrown blood and oil on the steps of the federal building, cut the fences around the nuclear test site in Nevada, and we have also climbed on the Cardinal's bulldozer and climbed to the top of his bell tower and been arrested. We have been arrested countless times. We have fed the multitudes of thousands of homeless people at our hippie kitchen. We have given out thousands of shoes, blankets, clothes, and tarps, and shopping carts as well. We have lived simply in our own house with the poor and homeless, some of whom have died with us as we prayed with them in our hospice room. It was an answer to prayer. We have influenced public policy so that Skid Row has become an Ellis Island for the poor and homeless, with tents and tarps proliferating the sidewalks and streets, proclaiming that the neoliberal capitalist system is broken. But this is not success as the world knows it. Christ remains crucified in the poor and homeless of Skid Row, as well as all the poor and homeless throughout the world fleeing war, famine, and climate change. In this vein, I invite you to practice resurrection through resistance. In memory of Hiroshima Day this year, my 90-year-old wife, Catherine, and I will celebrate our 50th wedding anniversary with a party at Vandenberg Air Force Base, which tests nuclear missiles. In solidarity with DePaul students, Gaza City protests, and over 2,000 arrests nationwide, we will be arrested for trespassing as we cross the line. We will, with joy and some apprehension, go to jail, resisting the neoliberal capitalist system that creates Skid Row homeless refugees throughout the world, finances wars in Ukraine, murders babies in Gaza, annihilates the planet, and plots nuclear genocide. I invite you to join us in our practice of resurrection. It is an answer to prayer.
So I'm actually not, I'm a fraud Catholic worker. I'm not a Catholic worker. I teach Shakespeare in Skid Row on Fridays, and that's about all I can do because I'm not courageous. But I'm Jeff's publisher and friend, and so we published 3 of his books, and he's going to read from one book and another book. And if anybody wants a book and you can pay for it, great. And if you can't pay for it, we'll mail you one for free. And they're going to be over there, and you can sign up and put your address and stuff like that, and we'll send you stuff. So this is from the book, The Good Samaritan. Is that what we're reading next? Yes. And this was published on Easter Sunday in the LA Times a little while ago, not too long ago.
On LA's Skid Row, the challenge of the resurrection. I go to Mass almost every Sunday, but I try to avoid the big holidays, especially Easter. In most Christian churches, Easter is a kind of triumphalistic affirmation of Christian certainty. My sense is that the resurrection is not a celebration. It is a threat and a challenge. Even though I am a Catholic worker and I live and work with the homeless and serve a meal at our soup kitchen every day, I do not want to encounter the risen Christ. For how could any of us begin to measure up to his example? Every morning I get up in our dark, unheated house, my feet freezing the moment I hit the floor. I am not a morning person. I am cranky at least until noon. Today, I am part of the morning crew. We sweep our dining garden patio, and then we break out the hoses and water the plants and trees and flowers. The hoses are old and leaky, full of kinks. I am in a bad mood, cursing at the hose and the water that is running down into my shoes, which will be cold and wet throughout the day. "Excuse me," comes a voice. The last thing I want to hear at 7 a.m. is, "Excuse me." I am sorry, sir. We're not yet open. Actually, I am thinking you are not supposed to be in here because we're not yet open. I'm wondering Which incompetent Catholic worker let you slip in? Could I use your restroom, he persists. He is an elderly black man bent over on his cane with a battered suitcase at his side. He wants to use the bathroom. It is 7 a.m. and our bathroom will not be open until 9:30. I could take him into our soup kitchen and let him use the restroom where we store our supplies. But the last time I did that, we lost all of our hand soap containers. I could take him into the clinic, but the woman who runs it would not be too happy to have her setup time disrupted by a man who needs to use the bathroom when we're not open. In either case, I could take personal responsibility for him to abandon my job assignment and hang around until he finishes his business, which from past experience I know will take a while. When you let a homeless person with no access to sanitary facilities use your restroom, he is going to make the most of it. Not just urinating and defecating, but turning the bathroom sink and floor into a makeshift laundry and shower room. He is likely to take off his shirt and pants and wash his entire body and his clothes as well. Once a homeless person occupies your restroom, even a court order has no power to disrupt the urgency of their sanitary needs. Please, sir, I really need to use the restroom. His voice is now frantic. My shoes are still wet and I'm still cold and cranky. My alternatives are unpleasant and I'm thinking quick on my feet. So I say, where did you go yesterday? I went to the midnight mission, he says. Well, why don't you go back there? Please, I don't think I can make it, sir. Well, you can't go here. We're not open till 9:30. Not a very Christian response. Right. I could just blame it on the heartlessness of the city bureaucracy that took away the 30 portable toilets we fought so hard to get. I could blame it on the lack of personnel to make our own facilities available for longer hours. I could blame it on the police who give out citations to homeless people who urinate and defecate on the street. Yet I could also say, perhaps more honestly, that I do not want to be challenged by the risen Christ in the person of an elderly black man leaning over his cane with a suitcase at his side who needs to use the restroom. What if this man had arrived on Easter morning and I had turned Jesus Christ out to do his business in the street like every other homeless man and woman in our city? For me, the resurrection is frightening and challenging.
This is from Jeff's first book, which is mostly collected essays, many of them published in the LA Times and other places. And this was spanned a long period of time from sort of the beginning of your writing to the end, and it's called Broken and Shared. This is about shopping carts.
This is called The Universe Bends Towards Justice. Our street looked like the Nazi blitzkrieg. Instead of the Nazis attacking England or France, the fascists were attacking targeting 4 red shopping carts piled high with the belongings of homeless people who had joined us at the Catholic Worker Soup Kitchen for lunch. The men had parked their carts in front and had been gone no longer than 10 minutes when 5 police cars, a city dump truck, a skip loader, and 10 police officers swooped in and dumped the men's meager belongings into the street. The dismal pile was quickly picked up by a skip loader. Hearing the commotion, the homeless owners of the shopping carts came rushing out into the arms of the police, who pushed them back and told them that their belongings were gone and could not be retrieved. "No, this is abandoned property. Get back or you will be arrested." Had I been there in time, I would have attempted to jump into one of the shopping carts because I actually possessed a bill of sale and I could prove that the Catholic Worker owned the carts. Over the last 10 years, the Catholic Worker, in an effort to assist homeless people, thwart police malfeasance, and piss off the business community, has purchased over 50,000 shopping carts for homeless people. We don't often tell our donors about this secret project because we fear that our most faithful supporters might consider it just a bit too profligate, even for Catholic workers. Even though we actually own the shopping carts, when police and city agencies confiscate them, they often don't return them. Despite numerous court rulings in our favor, police and city officials continue to act with impunity. Along with the destroying personal property, they seize such things as pillows, milk crates, and excess blankets as contraband because they are items that give comfort. Like battle-weary soldiers, our hearts get hardened. But on this particular occasion, one of our soup kitchen volunteers from the suburbs observed the police onslaught. Richard was shocked. Can't we do something about this? They just took everybody's stuff. They were just eating lunch, and when they rushed out to grab their shopping carts, and the police just said, "This is abandoned property." It's embarrassing when volunteers come from the suburbs. They think that the same rules that apply there apply everywhere. But that's not how it works on Skid Row. If you're gone for 5 minutes to wash, eat, or relieve yourself, you lose all of your possessions. If you leave a friend in charge of your shopping cart and the police suspect that your friend is not the actual owner, boom, gone to the city dump. I felt like the cop in that old Jack Nicholson movie. I imagined myself saying to our suburban volunteer, "Forget it, Jake, it's Chinatown." So inured had I become to the way things are on Skid Row that I did not even bother to contact our civil rights attorney, Carol Sobel, who years ago in federal court affirmed the right of homeless people to security in their person and property. Fortunately, mutual friends did contact her. She came, took depositions collected photos, and took the case to federal court. I was heartened, but still did not expect any results. The way city officials and police articulate the story of Skid Row, everyone on the street is either a drug addict or a drug dealer, and those people do not actually have constitutional right to security in their person or property. In August, when a ragtag group of soup kitchen workers gathered in federal courtroom, the room began to fill up with off-duty police officers dressed in suits and ties, the very officers who had participated in the attack and actually planned and ordered the property theft in front of our soup kitchen. I recognized the captain of Central Division, as well as senior lead officer Dion Joseph, who is also head of the Safer City Initiative. Given the turnout of such an impressive police brass, I was expecting an affirmation of police impunity. In other words, I thought they were going to get away with it. So I was as unprepared as the city attorney was when Judge Philip Gutierrez made his announcement. Before we begin court, he said, I need to inform the court that in 1980, I was a summer intern at the Catholic Worker Soup Kitchen. I chopped onions, I served food, I cleaned toilets, and Catherine Morris was my supervisor. But I have had no contact with them since, except that I do see Ms. Morris periodically protesting the war in Iraq, but I do not speak to her. Therefore, I see no reason to recuse myself from this case. Whoa. You could have heard the city attorney's jaw drop to the table from here to Santa Monica, and quite frankly, mine as well. We were all shocked. None of the old-timers at the Catholic Worker recognized Judge Gutierrez's face or his name. Miraculously, 2 days later, we got a federal injunction affirming the right of homeless people to security in their person and property. Richard was elated. For him, it was an affirmation that the system works. For me, I was in a state of shock. Where did this come from? We are all formed by our individual life experiences. We are raised Republican or Democrat, Protestant, Jewish, or Catholic, pro-life or pro-choice. But Judge Gutierrez was formed in some measure by his experience chopping onions, cleaning toilets, and serving food to the homeless at the Catholic Worker Soup Kitchen. All formations being equal in the eyes of the law, it was appropriate that he did not recuse himself from this case. From our perspective and the perspective of the folks who pushed shopping carts containing the last of their earthly treasures, it is like one of those unlikely biblical stories. Just when you had given up all hope, just when you thought that the authorities had the final word, just when you thought that the rules of the suburbs did not apply on Skid Row, there is a parting of the waters, and the universe, in the words of Dr. King, bends towards justice.
Do you have any questions?
You can come up to the mic or.
Do you have any answers?
Thank you so much for being here and talking with us. I was actually in LA. And
The mic's not working.
Turn it on.
Thank you so much for what you shared with us. I was actually in LA for an event that was at the theater in the middle of somewhere near Skid Row. So, and I
Department, maybe?
no, it's an actual theater that's the home of, I think, Latina theater. It's okay. It definitely was there. Because when I didn't know that the Catholic Worker House was in that area, but I did see homeless people. And I was surprised that what people told me was Skid Row, where we were walking through every day, was still the way it was. I mean, you would see people some days and, camped out, and then another day there'd be no one there. But in the midst of that, in the midst of that part of LA, I saw the growth of huge hotels going up, some fancier restaurants starting to build in toward, I guess they were going east slowly. There's a Whole Foods a little away from the Skid Row area, but I couldn't imagine that the Catholic work was there. So if I get to LA again, I will go looking. Thank you.
It's a city of contrasts, and I don't know where you were, but when you go further east, there's a Skid Row enclave, a 50-block enclave of homeless tents and tarps, and people living on the street, and
right next to luxury apartments. So.
Yeah.
I mean, I said this to another group, but there's a line which is Main Street, and on one side of that is these guys and all of the services which are in a 50-block area. There's 70,000 homeless people in Los Angeles and County, and about 5,000 or 6,000 on Skid Row. It's gotten way worse than it's ever been. And if you go on one side of the street, you're in the fanciest restaurants in downtown Los Angeles, 3-star Michelin restaurants, places where you can get a pedicure with a glass of champagne in your hand. And if you cross that street, you'll be arrested if you do the same thing. And it's really appalling. It's the highest rent in Los Angeles. It's downtown now, which is unbelievable.
Jeff, my name is Bob Groff. We never met in person, but we talked on the phone for years when we were having the Milwaukee 14 reunion. And you were our keynote speaker. Didn't show up, but still influenced my life. I read your books, and we got lots of your books. And I just want to say one thing. You mentioned about the Milwaukee 14 and the retreat that was there. Mike Cullen, who's still alive, one of the 4 of us. Yeah. 4 of the 14 still alive is Mike Cullen. And I'm sort of glad something came good of our action.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to meet you. You did so much for me, and I just am grateful to meet you.
I'll ask a question for you. Is that okay? So I had said, I just thought it might be interesting, but I don't know how they do it. You know, they've been doing it for 55 years or more. And Susan gave the answer to this earlier, and it's a really interesting answer because, anyway, maybe you could talk about that a little bit.
It was Professor Spalding that said, how do you continue to do this work in the face of such failure? As we said that the problem over and over again, I said, there are more homeless folks now than ever, and they don't get any more money than they did. They haven't gotten a raise in 40 years. They get $221 per month. And that's what I wanted to say in their class on inequality today. What would you do with $221? You're certainly not going to find a home. But anyways, so that was the question. How do you remain doing that? How do you stay resilient? And Jeff said it's the faithful, being faithful to the gospel. And I agree that is part of it. But for me, it's community. Community binds us and binds me. And I personally could not do this alone. And everybody has a different gift in community, and it all seems to work out. And I just constantly reminded of what Scott said in the beginning. I also said was that it all started to happen when we were just sitting around talking, and it all started to happen. And that's what it is. People, that's community.
This is much more of a theoretical question. Thank you again for speaking in my class. Obviously, there is extreme inequality in America, and you have some experience with civil disobedience and some policy advocacy and work. Do you think the system set up in our country politically, the way it is, can we use that as a tool to solve inequality at the extreme it's at now? Or do you think that there needs to be some sort of collective action, revolution type movement in order to bring about real change? Because as you said, you do this work for over half a century and it's still just getting worse, the inequality we see in America.
I don't know how to answer that. I think we should tax the rich we have more billionaires than ever, and more homeless people than ever, and we should take note of those extremes.
Tax the rich and give it to the poor.
Tax the rich and give it to the poor.
If you think of Jeff Bezos has what, $142 billion? Like 1 billion would fix a lot of problems. Like it doesn't make really sense to me, and I don't want to speak out of turn, but like, what do you need all that money for? I mean, so get a boat and get a hot wife and get a jet plane and get a dog or whatever. But then what do you need it for? Right? It doesn't make any sense.
We need a revolution of the heart, as Dorothy Day said.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm wondering what your experience is with people interested in the LA Catholic worker who find their way to you or are interested in getting involved. I mean, that's one of the signs of a healthy community is that they find ways to introduce and be like Dorothy sometimes called it, like a graduate school for the real world. Are you open and available for volunteers or people who want to
yes,
explore?
Yes, and yes. And yes. Yes, we have a summer program every summer where anyone of any age, although it does tend to be college students, come to live with us for 6 to 7 weeks and live and work with us and get a feel for what our work is. And, instead of like, I'm reminded of the Army, the way they recruit, it's like, for us, it's like, come and build relationships with, the marginalized. And that's part of it. But yes, and another way to come, and I know this is really far away, what I also want to plug is the Chicago Catholic Worker is here, and any St. Francis House, and I'm sure they are always looking for volunteers as well. As I said in the class today, it takes about 19 people to do the work that we do operating the soup kitchen. It's basically we're running a restaurant 3 days a week, and there's only about 8 people in our community. So we definitely need volunteers and also people that want to live with us and stay longer. But yeah, and that's how you can also go to our website, and there's an application for a come and see, where, if you can't fit into the summer program or you don't feel like you want to, well, you could do that, and you come, it's an application, and you come for a month, and you also can see what it's like that way. But we're always looking for people.
And they have a really great cadre of people who are retired students, people that show up 1 day a week, and they're pretty great, and they fill out. They're amazing. They're completely amazing. And I think I said this in someplace, but it's good to know a poor person, and a lot of people don't know anybody who's really poor, and it does change you. And it's a graduate school, as you said, Michael, for the real thing,
Thank you so much for being here. I'm a friend and volunteer of St. Francis House here, and they're amazing, an amazing community.
Give a hand for the St. Francis House.
So I loved the story you began with about the moment when you died to the American dream and rose on the other side of that to live, a life in the kingdom of God afterwards. What do you say to those who did not yet have that experience, or maybe are not so decided as to have that experience, who maybe are suspended between, the sort of the American dream, but also a better dream? And just what do you say to that sort of universe of people who maybe are sympathetic, but maybe not yet committed, or thinking about it, discerning about it, but trying to figure it out?
Come to the summer program. We need people.
Yeah, you don't have to stay. It's not a cult.
But I think it's a great question, because there are a lot of people who want to do good, but don't want to live in community, or, and you don't have to be Catholic also, just FYI. In fact, a lot of your people are not Catholic. So it is a really good question. Because you see all these kind of liberal people that kind of think, okay, I want to help. And so often the money goes in the wrong place. I learned from you to hand the money directly to the person and not to hand it to an institution. I mean, there's stuff that you don't know that by trying to do good, you actually don't do good. And it's a really great question, I think. And it's a really hard one to answer.
I would say yes. It's it takes discernment. For Jeff, maybe it was one moment. For me, I'm I was in it for, I took the plunge in like 1990 after hanging out at the Catholic Worker because I worked across the street and I really enjoyed the people. Although I tell you, I wasn't really working. I was just having a good time. But it was through that relationship that brought me to Philadelphia, because 3 good friends opened the house there. And I thought, I don't want to be working with him, because I didn't want people to say, oh, it's Jeff's sister. That's why they let her in, So now I don't care. I came back. But yeah, that's what led me to Philadelphia, just hanging around. And it was a process. It was a process. And so I guess I would say hang around the Chicago Catholic Worker, hang around St. Francis House, or as I say, San Francisco House. Just kidding. Yeah, keep doing that. And you don't have to be one or the other, because Catholic Worker houses, the world, I mean, we need people that are still of the world. As I said, we could not do it. We could not operate the kitchen without our cadre of amazing volunteers. And that also includes people that just come in for the day. Like, they just hear about us. And sometimes they just come one time, but a lot of times they come one time and they're hooked. So that's what I would say. But it's a great question. I hope that helped.
So I only show up on Fridays to teach Shakespeare, and this was Jeff's idea, and I didn't think it was going to fly at all. And it started out really small, and I think it's going pretty well, but I'm the one that got changed, not them. I saw stuff that my students could not say what they say. And that was astounding to me. And I'm not being patsy about this whole thing. It's like, I thought, okay, these people are homeless. Some of them aren't educated. Some of them are drug addicted, whatever. And it's pretty remarkable what I can talk about there that I cannot talk about in this climate on a university campus, where freedom of speech is being shut down left, right, and center. I'm not probably in DePaul, but certainly a lot of other places. So it's kind of interesting who gets changed.
So Jeff has been arrested more than 40 times, we hear. Could you tell us share a bit about your experience with the prison system, being arrested, and those of you on the outside communicating with Jeff when he was on the inside?
The last time I was in prison was with a Catholic worker named Dennis Appel, and it was a pretty good time.
Like, would they room you together?
Yes, the old people, we accidentally got roomed together because we were old guys, and but I've been in county jails throughout the system, and I've slept on floors in the county jail, and I've slept without a blanket, and the poor go through that all the time, and I just choose to go to jail whenever it occurs to me, and so I am really grateful for all the poor people who, I suffer. I suffer with the poor. I join the poor when I go to jail, and I suffer with them, and I suffer with the people of Gaza, and I suffer with the suffering people poor throughout the world, and that gives me strength and courage to go back to jail and do it again. And I have lots of trepidation. I don't like to be cold, and I don't like to sleep on floors, but on cement floors, and I really the poor keep me going, and the image of the crucified Christ before me, and I suffer with them.
So that's probably a good place to end. So I taught Kierkegaard today, which is one of my favorite classes. And Kierkegaard says somewhere that Christianity can't be taught, it can only be witnessed. And I'd like to thank our guests and honorees today for their witness.